She came as a mail-order bride, bruised and broken, until a cowboy said, "You're safe in my arms." Emma stepped off the train with a mixture of fear and hope tangled in her chest. The small whistle of the departing train faded into the quiet of the dusty western town, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She clutched the worn leather strap of her small suitcase, feeling its weight, yet it was nothing compared to the burden she carried in her heart. She was far from home, far from the life she had known, and every step she took on the wooden platform echoed in her mind like a warning. The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's name, and strangers were noticed immediately. Emma felt the eyes of the few townspeople who were near, peering curiously as she moved down the street. She had always been used to watching people, observing their moods and intentions, but now she felt exposed. Her past had taught her caution, and every look, every whisper made her tense. She had fled a life that had been filled with controlling relatives and a fiancé who had never truly cared for her. That life had left her bruised, not only in body but in spirit. She had learned that trusting others could lead to heartbreak, that kindness often came with strings, and that freedom was a fragile, fleeting thing. Her new home was modest but solid, a small wooden house with a porch that overlooked an open field. The air smelled faintly of hay and earth, and the wind carried a soft chill that brushed against her cheeks. Emma had been warned that life here would be different, slower perhaps, but real. She wanted real. She wanted to breathe again without the constant weight of someone else's demands pressing down on her. Yet as she stepped inside, the quiet of the empty house pressed down on her, almost as heavy as her memories. She set down her suitcase and looked around. The house was simple but clean. There was a kitchen with a small wooden table, a few chairs, and a stove that looked as though it had been used for many years. A narrow staircase led to the rooms above, and the sunlight streamed in through the windows, casting soft shadows across the wooden floor. Emma let out a slow breath, realizing that this was hers if she could only learn to make it feel that way. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a moment to feel the silence. It was not the kind of silence that threatened or suffocated. It was different, calmer, almost inviting. Yet even in this calm, her body remained tense, ready for any sudden threat, a habit from the years when she had lived with fear as a constant companion. She ran her fingers along the table, feeling the smoothness of the wood, reminding herself that she could touch and interact with the world without fear, even if it was just in small ways. Emma's mind wandered back to her journey here. The train ride had been long, and each town they passed through had brought a mix of anxiety and curiosity. She had watched the field stretch endlessly, imagining that somewhere out there could be a life that didn't hurt, a life where she could be herself without hiding. Each passing town had been a reminder that she was moving farther away from the chains of her past. She remembered the moment she had left her home country, the tears she had tried to hide from her family, and the tight knot of fear in her stomach as she boarded the train alone. But now, standing in this new place, she felt that fear slowly mingling with something else, something like hope. Despite the hope, the town seemed intimidating. She had been told she would be a mail-order bride, and the concept still made her uneasy. She had heard stories of women being treated poorly, abandoned, or trapped in situations worse than the ones they had left. Emma wanted to believe that her choice would lead to a better life, but part of her remained cautious. She had learned that appearances could be deceiving, and trust was earned, not given. Every glance from a stranger made her wonder whether she could really escape the pain she had known for so long. The first night in the house was the hardest. Emma sat on the edge of the narrow bed in her room, the blankets wrapped tightly around her. She listened to the quiet hum of the wind through the trees and the faint creak of the house settling. Her mind replayed scenes from her past, moments of harsh words, raised voices, and the constant pressure to be someone she was not. She felt tears welling up, not just for the pain she had endured, but for the life she was leaving behind, the life she was unsure she could ever fully embrace. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to push the memories aside. This new life could be different. It had to be different. She reminded herself that she had come here to escape, to heal, to find a place where she could be safe. Yet, safety felt like a fragile thing, almost unattainable, as if it could slip away at any moment. The walls around her heart were still high, built from years of hurt and disappointment. She knew that if she wanted to truly start over, she would have to let those walls come down, piece by piece. In the days that followed, Emma began to explore the town cautiously. She walked along the dusty streets, noticing the small shops and houses, the way people waved at one another, and the quiet rhythm of life that was so different from the chaos she had left behind. The townspeople were polite but wary, giving her space while also watching closely. Emma understood this. She herself had once been wary of outsiders, and she respected that others might feel the same about her. Emma visited the small grocery store, her eyes scanning the shelves, trying to remember what she needed while keeping an eye on the cashier, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. The woman smiled gently at Emma and asked if she was new in town. Emma nodded, offering a small, cautious smile in return. It was a simple interaction, but it reminded her that there could be kindness in the world, and that perhaps she could find people who would treat her with respect. Still, there were moments when the past crept in, unbidden. She flinched at sudden noises, recoiled at harsh tones, and sometimes found herself wishing she could retreat back into the safety of solitude. She knew that adapting to this new life would not be easy. The scars she carried were not only physical but emotional, and they influenced the way she moved through the world. Every step, every interaction was a test of her courage. Then came the first hint of warmth, a moment that would later grow into something much deeper. While walking near the edge of town, Emma noticed a man working on a small barn. He was tall, with broad shoulders and hands calloused from work, moving with a quiet strength that was both reassuring and steady. He glanced up and offered a polite nod, which Emma returned hesitantly. There was something in his calm presence that made her chest feel lighter, if only for a moment. She could not explain why, but it was the first time in a long while that she felt seen, not judged, not used, just seen. As days passed, Emma began to settle into small routines. She learned where the bakery was, which store sold the best flour, and how to navigate the town without feeling completely lost. Each small victory, each successful interaction, gave her a sense of control she had not felt in years. She allowed herself brief moments of laughter, small smiles that she had thought she had forgotten how to make. The routine did not erase her pain, but it reminded her that life could be simple, manageable, and even gentle at times. At night she would sit on the porch, listening to the distant calls of owls and the soft rustling of trees. The quiet was no longer threatening, it was comforting. She let herself imagine what her life could be, dreaming of freedom, peace, and perhaps even companionship, though the thought scared her. She was aware that trusting someone again would be difficult, but she could not deny that the idea of safety, of being cared for, was beginning to feel like something she could hope for. Emma knew the journey ahead would not be easy. The town was welcoming, but her heart was still fragile. She understood that healing would take time, patience, and courage. But as she stood on the porch one evening, feeling the wind on her face and watching the sky turn from orange to deep blue, she allowed herself the tiniest flicker of hope. Perhaps here, in this quiet town, she could find a place to belong, a place where she could finally breathe without fear. Her journey had only just begun, and already Emma realized that survival was no longer enough. She wanted more than to exist. She wanted to live, to feel, to trust again. And though she did not yet know how, the thought of a new beginning made her chest swell with cautious optimism. For the first time in a long while, She felt that maybe, just maybe, she could be safe, and perhaps even happy, in this strange new land she now called home. Emma woke early the next morning, her body still stiff from the long journey, yet a small sense of determination stirred within her. The previous day had been difficult, filled with moments of doubt and the weight of her memories pressing down on her chest, but now the sun rose over the town in soft, golden light, and it seemed to whisper that new days could bring new possibilities. She had decided that she would not allow fear to control her life. If she wanted a future here, she had to take steps, even if small, toward independence and connection. She started by organizing the small house she would call her own. Dusting the furniture, arranging the few belongings she had brought, and sweeping the wooden floors, she found satisfaction in small tasks. It was the first time in a long time that she felt she could shape a space around her, instead of constantly adjusting herself to the demands and whims of others. Each action, though simple, gave her a sense of control she had rarely experienced. Later, she ventured into town. The streets were quiet at first, with only a few early risers moving along the dusty paths. Emma walked slowly, taking in the shops, the fences, and the way the sunlight painted everything with warmth. She noticed the smiles of shopkeepers as she passed, cautious yet polite, a sign that the town had rules, rhythms, and unspoken kindness. Emma's nerves were still present, a subtle undercurrent of anxiety reminding her not to let herself feel too safe too quickly. She knew that people could disappoint, betray, or take advantage of trust too easily. Her first stop was the general store. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood and spices. Shelves were lined with jars, cans, and small packets of goods that seemed both foreign and familiar. Emma wandered slowly, taking care to select only what she needed for the day. A kind-faced woman behind the counter noticed her hesitance and smiled warmly. "You're new here, aren't you?" the woman asked, her voice gentle, almost nurturing. Emma nodded, offering a small, uncertain smile. "Yes, I just arrived yesterday." "Well, welcome," the woman said, placing a small package of flour on the counter. "If you need anything, don't be afraid to ask. We look after our own here." The words made Emma's chest tighten, but not with fear. For the first time in a long while, someone spoke to her without judgment or expectation. It was a small kindness, but it carried weight. She realized that perhaps not everyone would exploit her vulnerabilities. Perhaps there were people who truly wished her well. After leaving the store, Emma wandered toward the edge of town, where the land opened into fields and barns. The air smelled of earth, grass, and livestock, a fragrance both grounding and unfamiliar. She walked carefully, taking in every detail, trying to memorize the sights and sounds so that she would feel a little more at home here. It was then that she saw him, Luke. He was working near a barn, his broad shoulders moving as he lifted hay bales with practiced ease. He wore a simple shirt and jeans, and the sleeves of his shirt were rolled up to reveal strong, calloused arms. His movements were steady, calm, and deliberate, a contrast to the restless, anxious energy that still lingered in Emma. Luke noticed her almost immediately, giving her a polite nod as she approached. Emma felt her chest tighten, unsure how to react. She had learned to be cautious around men, to expect impatience, anger, or judgment. Yet there was something in his presence that made her hesitate in the best possible way. There was no pressure, no demand, no expectation, just observation and calm. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm but neutral. "You must be new in town." Emma nodded again, unsure why her lips felt dry. "Yes, I just arrived." "Well," Luke said, setting down a bale of hay and wiping his hands on a rag, "welcome. I'm Luke. If you need help finding your way around or anything else, just let me know." The simplicity of his offer, without any hint of judgment or manipulation, disarmed her slightly. She found herself nodding again, and for a fleeting moment, the tight knot of fear in her chest loosened. In the following days, Emma began to establish a cautious routine. She explored the town in small increments, learning which streets led to the bakery, which paths connected to the post office, and how to navigate the dusty fields without getting lost. Each small accomplishment gave her a quiet sense of independence and confidence. She learned to pay attention to people's gestures, the way neighbors greeted each other, and the subtle signals that indicated kindness or caution. Luke became a familiar presence, though their interactions were still brief and measured. He offered small acts of assistance, a steady hand when she stumbled on uneven ground, help carrying groceries, and a friendly conversation that never pressed her to reveal more than she was comfortable sharing. Emma appreciated his patience, recognizing that it was a rare quality. People in her past had always rushed, demanded, or tried to control her, but Luke seemed content to let her set the pace. One afternoon, while helping him repair a fence, Emma felt the first genuine sense of ease she had experienced in years. The work was physical, demanding, yet grounding. The rhythm of hammering nails and tying wire distracted her from the constant background noise of anxiety that had become so familiar. Luke worked beside her, offering guidance when needed and stepping back when she managed well on her own. The simple act of working together, without expectation or judgment, was healing in ways she had not anticipated. Evenings were the hardest, when the quiet of her home reminded her of the past she had fled. She would sit by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, feeling the ache of loneliness and the shadows of old fears pressing in. Yet the memories of the day, the small kindnesses, the successful tasks, the moments of calm, offered a delicate counterbalance. She allowed herself to hope that perhaps this new life could be different, that maybe, just maybe, she could feel safe again. Emma began to notice subtle changes in herself. She laughed quietly at small mistakes, like spilling flour on the kitchen floor, and felt a fleeting pride in mastering simple chores. She smiled at children passing by, and for the first time in a long while, those smiles were genuine, not forced. She began to dream in small ways, imagining what her life could be, thinking about what she might enjoy, and allowing herself to feel a little lighter with each passing day. The bond with Luke grew slowly. He shared stories about running his ranch, about the challenges of caring for animals and land, and about losses he had endured. These stories were shared without expectation, a simple offering of connection. Emma listened, finding comfort in his honesty and quiet strength. She realized that trust was not given lightly, but it could grow when nurtured carefully. One evening, after a long day of work, Luke invited her to join him on a walk through the fields. The sun was low, painting the sky with soft oranges and pinks. Emma felt nervous but agreed, sensing that there was nothing threatening in the offer. As they walked, Luke spoke about the rhythm of the land, the changes of the seasons, and the importance of patience. Emma listened, absorbing not only his words but the calm energy he carried. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life where she did not have to constantly look over her shoulder, a life where she could breathe without fear, even if only for a few hours each day. She realized that healing was not about erasing the past, but about learning to live alongside it, finding moments of peace and trust that could grow stronger over time. Days turned into weeks, and Emma's confidence grew, though cautiously. She began to take on small responsibilities around her home and in the town, learning to navigate without fear. Each small victory reinforced her sense of self, reminding her that she was capable and deserving of a safe, fulfilling life. Luke remained a steady presence, patient and non-intrusive, offering guidance when needed and space when she required it. Their connection deepened naturally, rooted in respect and quiet support. Emma felt a sense of relief and hope she had not experienced in years. She began to understand that the world was not entirely cruel, that there were people who could be trusted, and that safety could exist in the presence of genuine care. One evening, as Emma prepared dinner in her small kitchen, She reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the fear she had felt stepping off the train, the loneliness of her first night, and the heavy weight of her past. Yet now, standing in her own kitchen, smelling the warmth of food cooking and thinking about the small joys she had experienced each day, she felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps, she thought, the life she had dreamed of, one filled with trust, safety, and even love, was possible. Though challenges remained and the scars of her past were far from erased, Emma knew that she had taken the first meaningful steps toward healing. The town was becoming a place of possibility rather than fear, and Luke, with his quiet strength and patience, was a reminder that not everyone would hurt her. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to imagine that she could not only survive but truly live, in a place where kindness and care were real, tangible, and waiting to be embraced. Emma had begun to feel more at home in the small town, yet she knew that real trust would not come quickly. Each day was a quiet challenge, a delicate balance between moving forward and protecting the fragile pieces of her heart. Even with her small victories, running errands, completing chores, smiling at the townspeople, there was a part of her that still flinched at sudden sounds, recoiled from unexpected touches, and kept her distance from anyone who tried to get too close. The scars of her past were still raw, and she could not ignore the years of fear that lingered in her muscles, her heartbeat, her very instincts. Luke noticed her hesitations, though he never mentioned them directly. Instead, he adapted without complaint. When they worked together on the farm, he would allow her to handle tasks at her own pace, offering gentle guidance only when necessary. If she stumbled or hesitated, he would steady her hand or silently hand her the right tool, never questioning her abilities or rushing her. In his calm and consistent presence, Emma began to understand something she had not felt in years. That trust could be rebuilt, not all at once, but slowly, carefully, and with patience. One morning, Luke asked her to accompany him to check on a small herd of cows grazing near the edge of the property. Emma felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. Being close to animals, walking in open spaces, and working near him all at once made her nervous. But she had also noticed that he never forced her to do more than she felt comfortable with, so she nodded and followed him. The sun was just rising, casting golden light over the fields, and the air smelled of fresh grass and earth. Even though her body was tense, her mind began to relax, if only slightly, in the quiet rhythm of the farm. They walked together, the sound of hooves soft against the ground. Luke spoke quietly about each cow, describing their personalities, the care they required, and the subtle signs of illness or distress. Emma listened closely, amazed by the attention and care he gave to these animals. She realized that the patience he displayed with the cows reflected his character, steady, kind, and reliable. Slowly, she allowed herself to believe that this patience might extend to her, too. During one particularly tense moment, a calf suddenly bolted, frightened by a rustling in the trees. Emma jumped back instinctively, her heart racing, and Luke reacted immediately, moving to catch the calf while keeping his voice calm and low. "It's okay," he said softly to her, not scolding, not criticizing. "You're safe." Even in that brief moment, the words had weight, and Emma felt a small piece of tension in her chest ease. She realized that for the first time in years, someone was protecting her not out of obligation but out of care. Their bond grew with these shared experiences, quiet but profound. Luke never demanded her attention, never pushed her to speak more than she wished, and never judged her reactions. Instead, he listened, observed, and responded in ways that made her feel valued. Emma began to trust his presence as something safe, a place where she could exist without fear. It was not easy. Her trauma was still present, and there were days when memories would come unbidden, bringing waves of anxiety and sorrow. Yet over time, she noticed that those waves were less overwhelming. that there were moments between them where she could breathe and simply exist without fear. One afternoon, Luke invited her to help repair a section of fencing that had fallen during a recent storm. Emma's hands were rough from gripping the tools, her arms tired, but she felt a strange sense of satisfaction. They worked side by side, sharing quiet conversation and comfortable silences. At one point, Emma dropped a hammer and Luke instinctively bent down to pick it up for her. She froze for a second, startled by the closeness, but then relaxed when she realized he was simply offering help, no judgment, no expectation. "You're doing well," he said quietly. "You've got a good rhythm." Emma felt warmth spread through her chest. Compliments had always been complicated for her, words that often came with hidden meanings in the past. But here, his praise was simple, honest, and free of pressure. She nodded, managing a small smile, feeling a spark of pride she had not experienced in years. Evenings were still moments of reflection and quiet challenge. Emma often sat on the porch, watching the sky shift from orange to deep indigo, the stars slowly emerging. The soft sounds of the town, the distant barking of a dog, the low hum of the wind, the occasional creak of a barn offered comfort. She allowed herself to think about the day, the moments she had survived, the tasks she had completed, and the interactions she had shared. And though fear lingered, it was no longer the dominant force in her life. One evening, after a long day of repairing fences and tending to the animals, Emma found herself overwhelmed by fatigue and emotion. She had pushed herself harder than usual, and her body ached. Sitting down on a worn bench outside the barn, she closed her eyes and let out a shaky breath. Luke noticed her sitting alone and came over slowly, his voice gentle. "Long day?" he asked. Emma nodded, unsure how to respond. Words were heavy now, carrying both fear and vulnerability. She wanted to speak, to share, but her voice felt fragile. Luke sat beside her without touching her, giving her the space to decide when, or if she would speak. The silence was comfortable, not forced, a quiet acknowledgement of her presence. After a long pause, she whispered, "It's harder than I expected." "I know," Luke said softly. "It takes time. You're not alone anymore, though. You don't have to be." The words struck her deeply. She realized that he meant them, that they were not empty reassurances. For the first time, she felt the faint stirrings of something she had not believed she would feel again. Trust. Slowly, she let herself breathe, letting the tension in her shoulders ease just a fraction. Over the next few weeks, Emma found herself leaning into small moments of trust. She allowed Luke to show her parts of the farm, guiding her hands when necessary, and teaching her how to handle tasks she had never imagined she could do. Every shared chore, every quiet conversation, every laugh over small mistakes strengthened a bond built on respect and patience. She began to feel that safety could exist, not as an abstract concept, but as something tangible, present in the way someone treated her. There were moments when Emma's past threatened to pull her back into fear. A raised voice in town or a sudden movement nearby could send her heart racing, her mind flooding with memories she had hoped to forget. Yet she began to notice that Luke's presence offered a counterbalance. His calm, measured responses and quiet reassurances reminded her that not all threats were real, that some people could be trusted to protect rather than harm. One late afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the fields, Emma and Luke were moving a small herd of sheep to a new pasture. The day had been long, and Emma's energy was waning. A sudden rustle in the bushes startled the sheep, and they began to scatter. Emma froze, her body tense, but Luke acted quickly, rounding up the animals with quiet authority. "You're safe," he said again, turning to her with a reassuring smile. "I've got this. You don't need to worry." Something shifted inside Emma at that moment. It was not simply the relief of knowing the animals were safe, but the realization that she, too, could be safe. His words were not hollow. They carried weight because he had shown, over weeks of patient actions, that he could be trusted. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax, even briefly, letting go of the tight grip of fear that had been her constant companion. As the weeks continued, Emma began to notice changes within herself. She laughed more easily, smiled without feeling guilty, and took pride in her accomplishments. She found comfort in small routines, caring for the animals, preparing meals, and walking through the town. Each day brought new challenges, but also new victories, and each victory reminded her that she was capable of more than survival. She was capable of living. The bond between Emma and Luke grew quietly but steadily. They shared simple moments, sitting by the fire after a long day, walking through the fields at sunset, and speaking about dreams and hopes in hushed tones. There was no rush, no pressure, just a gradual unfolding of trust and care. Emma began to feel that it was possible to love again, not recklessly or blindly, but carefully, with awareness and choice. One evening, during a particularly fierce storm, Emma found herself panicked and trapped inside the house. The wind howled and the rain beat against the windows, echoing the storm she had carried in her heart for years. She felt small, vulnerable, and terrified. She called out softly for help, and moments later Luke arrived. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arms around her and whispered, "You're safe in my arms." In that moment, something in Emma shifted. The walls she had built to protect herself began to crumble, not all at once, but piece by piece. She felt the warmth of his embrace, the steadiness of his presence, and for the first time in years, allowed herself to let go of fear, if only for a moment. She realized that healing was possible, that trust could grow, and that she could allow herself to feel comfort, safety, and care. Emma had been in the town for several months now, and slowly, the unfamiliar streets, buildings, and faces had begun to feel like home. The first days, weeks, and even months had been filled with uncertainty, fear, and hesitation, but she could now feel a growing sense of confidence that had once seemed impossible. The town was no longer an intimidating place full of strangers, but a community that welcomed her carefully, offering small gestures of kindness that she had learned to recognize and appreciate. Her routine was still simple, yet every day felt richer, filled with small victories that reminded her she was capable, independent, and worthy of safety and respect. Luke had become a constant presence in her life, not as someone who commanded her attention or dictated her actions, but as a quiet, reliable support. Their relationship had grown naturally, built on patience, mutual respect, and the steady rhythm of shared work on the farm and quiet conversations in the evenings. He never rushed her, never pushed her to reveal more than she felt comfortable sharing, and never expected anything in return. This consistency had become a foundation upon which Emma could begin to rebuild her trust in people, and slowly, in herself. Emma found herself smiling more often, laughing at small mistakes, and taking pride in her accomplishments. One morning, she prepared breakfast for both herself and Luke before he left for his work on the ranch. The simple act of making coffee, frying eggs, and baking bread reminded her that she could care for herself and for others without fear or expectation. It was a new feeling, empowering, gentle, and real. The sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the small kitchen, and Emma felt, for the first time in years, that she could breathe freely. Her confidence extended beyond the house as well. She now felt comfortable walking through the town, greeting shopkeepers by name, and even assisting neighbors with small tasks. A mother asked her to help her children gather firewood, and Emma did so with care and patience. The children laughed and ran around, their joy infectious, and Emma felt a spark of happiness she had not known she could experience. She realized that she was no longer only surviving, she was participating in life. The work on the farm continued to be both a challenge and a source of growth. Emma learned to care for the animals, repair fences, and manage the small garden. Each task reminded her that she was capable, that she could take responsibility without fear, and that her presence mattered. Luke often worked beside her, offering gentle guidance when necessary and allowing her space when she wanted independence. The balance of support and freedom gave Emma a sense of empowerment she had never felt in her previous life. One afternoon, while mending a fence along the edge of the property, Emma realized how much she had changed. The woman who had arrived months ago, frail and fearful, would not recognize the person she had become. She was still cautious, but no longer paralyzed by fear. She could laugh at small mishaps, speak to neighbors without anxiety, and take pride in her accomplishments. She had learned to trust herself and others in ways she had never thought possible. Luke had played a quiet but vital role in this transformation. One evening, after finishing their work in the fields, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink, and the air carried the gentle scent of earth and grass. Luke turned to her, his expression calm and sincere. "You've come a long way," he said. "You should be proud of yourself." Emma felt her chest swell with emotion. Compliments had always been complicated for her. Words often came with hidden meanings or expectations in the past, but Luke's words were different. They were genuine, grounded in truth, and offered without pressure. She nodded, managing a smile, realizing that she truly was proud of herself. She had endured so much, yet she had survived, adapted, and grown stronger. As the weeks passed, Emma began to open her heart in new ways. She allowed herself to hope for love and companionship, not recklessly or blindly, but carefully and intentionally. Luke's steady presence offered reassurance that love could be safe, patient, and nurturing. Their moments together were filled with quiet intimacy, shared meals, conversations under the stars, and the simple comfort of sitting side by side in silence. These small experiences, repeated over time, built trust and deepened the bond between them. Emma also began to confront parts of her past, not with anger or resentment, but with clarity and understanding. She reflected on the relationships and experiences that had hurt her, recognizing patterns that she would no longer allow to repeat. She understood that her trauma did not define her future, and that the strength she had cultivated could guide her toward a life filled with respect, care, and fulfillment. This realization was empowering, giving her the courage to face each day with renewed determination. One significant turning point came during a stormy night when Emma was alone in the house. The wind howled through the trees, rattling windows and doors, and the rain beat relentlessly against the roof. Her heart raced, memories of past fears resurfacing with intensity. She felt vulnerable, small, and overwhelmed. Without thinking, she called out for Luke. Moments later, he appeared at the door, his presence calm and reassuring. Emma ran into his arms and he held her close, whispering, "You're safe in my arms." The words, simple yet profound, had a transformative effect. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to fully relax, trusting not only Luke but also herself to receive care and comfort. The storm outside mirrored the storm she had endured in her life, but inside Luke's embrace, she found safety, warmth, and the possibility of healing. The experience marked a turning point for Emma. She realized that safety was not just about avoiding danger. It was about finding people and spaces that nurtured her, that allowed her to feel valued and protected. She began to approach life with a renewed sense of courage, willing to take risks in small ways, to build relationships, and to explore the world around her without fear. Emma's growth was evident to the townspeople as well. They noticed the way she carried herself, the confidence in her voice, and the kindness she offered to others. Her presence became a quiet source of inspiration, demonstrating that even someone who had endured great pain could rebuild, heal, and thrive. She had become not only a survivor, but also a participant in life, actively shaping her future rather than reacting to her past. Her relationship with Luke continued to deepen, evolving into a partnership grounded in mutual respect, care, and understanding. They shared responsibilities on the farm, planned small celebrations, and supported each other through challenges. Their connection was not defined by grand gestures, but by the accumulation of small, meaningful moments, handing each other tools, sharing meals, and offering words of encouragement. These gestures, repeated over time, built a foundation of trust and love that was solid, enduring, and genuine. One morning, Emma found herself helping Luke with a newborn calf that had been born overnight. The tiny animal struggled to stand, and Emma guided it gently, following Luke's instructions. As they worked together, she laughed softly at the calf's clumsy movements, feeling a deep sense of joy and connection. It was a simple moment, yet it carried profound significance. She realized that she had moved from fear and hesitation to confidence and engagement. She could nurture life, contribute meaningfully, and find fulfillment in her actions. Even as Emma embraced her new life, she did not forget the lessons of her past. She remained vigilant, cautious, and aware, understanding that healing was a process, not a destination. But she also understood that she could experience love, joy, and safety without guilt or fear. She had earned the right to feel secure, to pursue happiness, and to build meaningful relationships. Luke noticed these changes in her, and he felt a quiet pride as well. He had watched her journey from fear and fragility to strength and confidence, and he admired her resilience. Their bond, once tentative, had blossomed into a deep, enduring connection built on trust, patience, and shared experiences. They had weathered storms together, faced challenges, and supported each other through moments of doubt and fear. In doing so, they had created a foundation for a life filled with love, safety, and mutual respect. As months turned into a year, Emma reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She remembered the fear and loneliness of her first days in the town, the uncertainty she had felt stepping off the train, and the constant ache of her past. Yet she also remembered the small victories, the quiet acts of kindness, and the steady presence of Luke, who had shown her that trust and love could exist without fear or manipulation. One crisp morning, she and Luke walked together through the fields, the air filled with the scent of fresh grass and the sound of birdsong. Emma paused, taking in the scene, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had arrived bruised and broken, carrying the weight of past hardships, yet she had emerged stronger, capable, and ready to embrace life fully. She had found safety, trust, and love, not through grand gestures or sudden transformations, but through patience, perseverance, and the quiet accumulation of small moments that proved healing was possible. As she looked at Luke, she realized that the promise he had made months ago, "You're safe in my arms," was no longer just words. It had become a truth, a guiding principle for her life. She had learned to accept care, to trust, and to allow herself to feel safe. The walls she had built around her heart had not disappeared entirely, but they had softened, leaving space for love, joy, and hope. Emma smiled, a smile filled with quiet confidence and a sense of possibility. She had reclaimed her life, not by erasing the past, but by learning to live alongside it, to honor her experiences, and to embrace the opportunities before her. She knew challenges would still come, but she also knew that she had the strength, support, and resilience to face them. Together, Emma and Luke continued to build a life filled with trust, care, and quiet joy. Each day was a step forward, a reminder that healing was a journey, not a destination. And in that journey, Emma had found something she had long thought impossible: true safety, genuine love, and the freedom to simply be herself.